Greetings from Denver, Colorado, more specifically Cherry Creek. I'm here with our great client, Bob Pellegrini. He's been a client for a long time, and he just had a recent new success in real estate that I wanted to discuss. And I thank you so much for coming on to talk about this, Bob. Bob happens to live in Denver, and so I reached out to him and I said, hey, why don't we get together? So here we are. First of all, let's just give a little history.
Yeah.
How long have you been investing?
Started in 2012 with you.
Okay.
And I'm kind of one of the OGs, original guys.
Right.
We did the Arizona property tour.
Yep. That was our very first property tour ever.
Yeah. And I've been a client ever since. We've been doing business with you a long time, really. And, you know, I really appreciate all the hard work and education that you've given us over the years.
Thank you. Thank you. And you've got what, about a dozen properties now, give or take?
Well, I had a dozen, but I pared it back to 8, you know, because I had a lot of C properties.
Right. And so you upgraded. That's such a typical
right. And I rolled them into
upgrade
new construction.
To A properties and new construction. Start with the cheap properties and go from there. Okay, so the big thing that you did though lately, because we had you on the show to talk about all of your investing stuff before, and I know it's been going great. You know, you had one kind of problem property, but the others were working great. We talked about that on prior episodes, but this time I want to talk about something special, and that is rent to own deals or lease options. Bob was literally the first person to sign up for our Fire Your Managers course. So thank you for doing that. And he is basically taking his portfolio and turning them into lease options, rent to own deals. And this is getting you much better terms, much bigger security deposits by a long shot. Tell us about this deal you just did.
So the latest one, it was a new construction deal in North Alabama, Huntsville area that bought through the network and had America's Rental Managers as the company. They put a tenant in it, and it happened to be a Section 8, which was okay. You know, it was actually a pretty good tenant. But
not all Section 8 is bad. Some people make that their whole business model and love Section 8. That's all they do.
A little bit of a roll of the dice sometimes. You never know.
I get it.
But after 2 years, I decided I want to get away from that. And when we took that course, the whole idea is to get rid of your management company.
Right. So you fire your manager and you turn your tenant into a would-be owner, and you get a much higher security deposit from them. You get better rent from them. You just get a whole better experience. And you basically wash your hands of almost all maintenance responsibilities as well. So originally you put a tenant in there for 2 years. You had them. Did that tenant leave and you got a new tenant to do the rent to own deal, the lease option?
Well, I didn't.
The same tenant?
No, since she was getting 90% of her subsidy to pay for the rent, you know, so she couldn't afford the house anyway.
Okay, all right. So you got a new tenant.
Got a new one in there,
Okay, so the question is though, did you look for that new tenant as a rent to own lease option tenant? Is that the way they came in? Okay, because you could just do a typical rental ad and say, hey, you know, we've got a property for rent, and then bring up the conversation about rent to own, or even put them in as a normal renter and then turn them in, you know, a year later to a lease to own. So you can do this with existing tenants or with new tenants. That's my point.
And you can. But when you're starting off, this is a different technique because you're screening differently here. Because if it's just a straight up rental, you're looking for a pretty good credit score, a good background, and somebody who can afford it, basically. So if that's all they're going to do, great. Then your search is over with. But when you're doing a rent to own, you're looking for a particular client. So not only that you want to make sure they can afford the rent, but you want to see like, what's your credit score? If they can't go to a bank and apply for a standard mortgage loan.
And usually they can't at first. That's the point. They're on a program to basically rehabilitate their credit. And that's going to take them a couple of years, right? And that's why the lease option is good for them.
And that's the person you're looking for. You're not looking for somebody with a 700 credit score. Because they can go afford a house, you know.
And a lot of landlords would say you're not looking for that as a traditional renter either, because they're just going to move and buy a house. You want someone that's going to be more likely to be a tenant.
So the screening takes a little more work. It takes a little more diligence and time. And there's ways that you can make that a lot easier.
Yeah.
That's what Scott Poirier, was teaching us, that, how to screen it.
He's our empowered investor guide that we partnered with to do this program. Yeah.
But when you do that, it takes a little more time. You got to be a little more patient. But when you find the right person, because all it takes is one.
Yeah, right.
And once you find that person, you're able to get them in there, because you can get a little more premium on the rent.
So tell us about the deal. Okay. How much you pay for the property?
Okay. Well, I bought it for $3,099.
Okay. So $3,099. And this is now a 2-year-old house, right?
Yeah.
Okay. $3,099 you paid for it. And what was the lease option or rent to own price that you offered it to the tenant for? What did you agree to?
So
the tenant owner, I should say.
For the first year, it's going to be $339,900.
Okay. So they'd buy it for $339,900 if they exercise the option in 1 year.
Yeah, at the end of the first year. Yeah, it's set up to where they have to be in the house for at least the first year.
Okay.
And then they can exercise the option.
Got it. Okay, so they've got to wait a year to do it, right?
Yep.
And what happens if it goes 2 years? Is the price changing?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. So if they don't pull the trigger after the first year, then it bumps up to $349,900.
Okay, so it bumps up 10 grand more.
Yeah.
Okay. And how much option consideration or security deposit, in a sense, did you get from them?
Yeah, so the non-refundable security deposit, non-refundable deposit was $15,000.
Right. Okay.
Yeah.
So $15,000, and typically, what's your normal rent on that property? About $2,500.
Well, in this neighborhood, the normal rent is going to be maybe $1,950 to $2,100 for this particular neighborhood.
Okay, that's not great by any means for a 309 property, but how much did you rent it to them for on the tenant owner?
$2,100 for the first year.
Okay. And then the second year? It's
$2,200.
Okay. And they've got a $15,000 deposit, and normally you would get about a $2,100 deposit. So basically you've taken that deposit and you've now multiplied it times more than 7. Okay, or about 7.
Yeah.
You've got about a 7x higher deposit. And tell us about the agreement on the maintenance responsibilities.
So they are going to be responsible for maintaining the property.
Right.
So the only thing my responsibility is to maintain the insurance on the structure and the property taxes.
Okay.
So, but before she moves in, I make sure everything's 100% ready to go.
Got it.
Yeah.
So you don't have to do any maintenance, and because of this rent-own deal, you're really not managing a property anymore. You've done a deal with someone who is now thinking like an owner and is going to maybe become an owner, right? They've got the option to become an owner.
Yeah, exactly.
In 1 year or 2 years.
Right.
Now, does it extend out to 3 years, or is it just 2 years? At the end of 2 years, it's over.
Well, at the end of 2 years, we just put a clause in there that if at 2 years we can roll it forward and we renegotiate a new price and an increase.
A totally new deal.
Yeah.
New rent, new price, new everything.
Yeah.
And new deposit. New non-refundable deposit, or NROD.
Correct.
Right.
Yep.
And you have to really add back in the lack of property manager expense now to your deal.
Correct.
Because not only did your rent get higher, but how much were you paying your property manager? About $150, $200?
Yeah, it was about 100. Yeah, it was $152 a month.
Right. And so now your cash flow is really increased by, it's about $350 a month more.
Yeah.
Okay.
Right.
But it's even better than that because, as we all know, and we have taught you so many times, everybody, that your property manager is never the deal you think it is, because they're nickel and diming this, that, and the other thing. That's really good, Bob. What else do you want people to know about it? This is great.
It's not for everybody, but if you have some properties that are, in the more affordable range, because I still have some Memphis properties,
like C-class type property.
Yeah, and there's people that would be interested. This would be a good fit for somebody like that. Works hard, makes pretty good money, but they want to build some equity.
I mean, it really does. We have lots of student examples with people doing this with C-class, B-class, A-class, every strata of property. But of course, it does work a little bit differently. The advertising for it's a little different with each one. It can work with anything. Yeah. Do you want to do this with all your properties now?
I am working my way towards doing that. Yeah, because some of the C-class ones that I still have. So if I sell it, fine. I just roll it into a newer, better property.
Exchange.
Yeah, exactly. So I'd be okay with it if I, if I ended up selling most of them.
Yeah, and many times the tenant doesn't exercise the option, so that $15,000 deposit, unlike a security deposit, you don't have to give it back. That's the option. They are paying you for the right to possibly buy it 1 year or 2 years in the future. And some people do these out 3, 4, 5 years even. It's just a personal preference as to how long you do it. But that money is yours to keep.
Yeah.
So
that
$15,000 you collect.
Yeah, it's just a great way to simplify your self-management, because now you're putting a lot of the onus on the tenant owner to maintain the property. So it really eliminates a lot of those little stupid things, like clogged drains and
silly stuff. The doorbell doesn't work. I mean, just dumb little stuff, which, by the way, more and more in your contracts, just eliminate these things by contract. All of these little things, your tenant, just get them to be responsible for it. Many times they will, because they're not renting an apartment, they're renting a single family home. And so the attitude, even as a renter, as not a lease option buyer, tenant owner, their mentality should be different on a single family home. And we've taught you about that before. So good stuff. Bob, thank you so much for sharing this with our audience. We appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks.
And always appreciate the long-term business. And you've been on the show a couple times before talking about it. Many people have met Bob at our events on the recent Empowered Investor Cruise that we had. You were there. So it's always great to have you. Thanks.
All right. It's my pleasure. Thanks for having me.